Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the County Council's Adults and Health Committee, our meeting today, the 14th of October 2021. I'm Richard Howett, the Chair of the committee, with Susan van der Ven, our Vice Chair, on my right. We both welcome everyone to New Shire Hall for this meeting. Usual explanatory rules right at the start of the meeting, so photography and filming is perfectly permitted by members of the public and others. We're an open and transparent council, as long as it doesn't disrupt the proceedings in any way, of course. And similarly, can all of us make sure that our phones are turned on to silent and vibrate only or off altogether, to avoid the meeting being disrupted in any way. A reminder that we're live on on YouTube, and a recording of this meeting will then also be posted on the council's website. And welcome to everyone who's joining us online through the live stream. On housekeeping points, I think we're all getting familiar with New Shire Hall, but the toilets, including the accessible toilets, are in the corridor immediately to the left as I'm pointing. I will take a comfort break somewhere between 1.5 and 2 hours, depending on the progress of the meeting. I'll do it at a sort of natural point for the proceedings. There is no fire alarm test planned for today, so if the fire alarm goes, we should all in an orderly way evacuate the building and go to the muster point, which is on the green opposite the main entrance. I think those are all the introductory remarks I'm supposed to make, so that's very good. We now move to apologies for absence, and I've got Anne Hay has had to apologise today, and Councillor Howell is joining us. Thank you very much indeed for coming in her place. Any other apologies from that anyone knows about?
No.
Okay, we've got a full slate otherwise. That's item 1. Next, does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosure? You say I couldn't get it out, could I? Disclosable interest. There are none. And we are asked to approve the minutes of the meeting on the 22nd of September as an accurate record. If any committee member wants to raise a question on the accuracy of the minutes only, please do so now. There being none, I will take that as carried unanimously. And on that basis, the recommendation to approve the minutes is carried. And this is the point I sign them, Tamar, is that right? Yeah, let's do that. There we go, you can pass those to Tamar, thank you. We now move to item 2B, the action log. This is just for our notes. Does anyone want to raise any points on the action log, please? We're all being very quiet this morning. There are none. There are also no petitions or public questions, so we can move directly to the substantive item that we're here for, item 4. So let me introduce this. First of all, thank you for coming for this meeting that was originally a reserved day, but our committee, along with all of the major service committees of the council, has decided to have a meeting during October to look in detail at business planning and the preparations for our budget for 2022-23. We want to do this to involve members at an early stage in some of the discussions which are taking place, and to make sure all members are fully involved and able to ask questions and informed at this early stage of the process. So we're not taking any final decisions today around the budget, but it is very much looking at the direction of travel, and we'll be listening very, very carefully to what all the members say, and we'll be note-taking that, and then that will then influence the further work that's being done by the administration and by our officers. One big issue, as we've said at the past meeting, and I know some of you have heard this but some won't, who are joining us, is the dramatic impact, sadly, that bereavement because of COVID has had on our budget and changing the some of the budget expectations. And although there are lots of figures associated with that in our report, I'm sure all of us across all of the parties would understand and respect the fact that each bereaved person has a family and isn't just a number. And we've agreed to call this COVID loss when we debate it, out of respect for the families that will be aware that we're having such discussions. I know that that's something that all of us will be deeply sensitive to. Now, we've come all the way to Auchenbury. We've got a morning to do this, and therefore what I hope is that rather than having a traditional style officers present a report, we ask questions, they answer, and we all finish, we're going to scrutinise this in a slightly more detailed way. And so with our officers, we've broken up the report into 4 different pieces, where there'll be slides that are shown to us, copies of which are also on the desk, and then we'll ask and also comment on each of the 4 sections in order that we can have a really deep dive into the discussions which are taking place. The first of the 4 will be the broad context. I don't think we need to discuss that too much in terms of the council's budget, but I think everyone should be informed of that. But our ability to debate the overall financial strategy of the council is elsewhere. It's not in this committee. So I will close down any of us who stray into that. But in terms of the actual spending of this committee and its impact on the financial strategy, there's a chance for us to look at that. We'll then move on to what should our priorities be. We'll be then debating that. We'll then move on to some of the savings that have begun to be identified and be able to comment and ask questions about that. And then there's a last section around investment and pressures, which also affect our budget planning, business planning, and we'll finish this report in relation to that. And I imagine we're going to take some good time over this to, as I say, justify having this meeting and to enable all members to have a proper role within it. And you'll see in the recommendations, they include noting the comments in the debate. So every comment, rather than us have to come to decisions which aren't ready to be taken yet anyway, all of the comments in the debate will be listened to and noted, and then will influence the further work. So I hope that's all right in terms of how we proceed about this. The actual report is on pages 3 to 32 of the agenda pack. We've got an officer team here to do this, including Charlotte on the left-hand side, Zerva, Giotti, on the front bench, Zerva, Justine Hartley. I think people have begun to get know very well, who's our strategic finance manager, who's at the desk at the bottom there. But this is going to be presented to us by Will Patton, our Service Director of Commissioning. Will.
Thank you very much. And I obviously drew the short straw on this with all the other officers, but if we could go to the next slide. So, as the Chair has said, what we'd like to do is go through each section of the report, and we've largely broken that up into the 4 key sections, which is a corporate overview. We'll then turn to the joint administration priorities.
Could you just put that's right towards your mouth? It's just to make sure you're being really well heard. Thank you.
Okay, is that better? Yeah. The second one, we'll then turn to the joint administrative priorities, and then on to an overview of where we've got to with savings, pressures and investments, and then finally we'll finish off on timescales. And obviously we'll pause after each section. So starting with the corporate overview, I think it's important to say that the business planning process is iterative, and we've still got things and time to do. The plan is to bring back final draft business cases to this committee in December, and that's what we're aiming to do. And this will directly inform what we bring back in December. The second thing I think I'd like to draw your attention to is the corporate budget gap. So if you remember back in September, that stood at around 23.5 million, and that's as we stand today, reduced down to 19.5 million at a corporate level. As far as adults and health are concerned, what we've done here is broken down the sort of key areas that help inform our budget and really how it's made up. And I just want to quickly walk you through those. So the first one is the demand and demography number, which is 10 million. And we've been working on demand and inflation actually for some time, and we feel that that number is broadly right and broadly complete. We will continue to refine it between now and December. And just as a reminder, what that 10 million is, I suppose, is this is about the increase in the number of people that need support, and also the amount of support that they need. The inflation on care costs is largely contractually driven with our providers. So this is where we are within our contracts with providers. We have inflationary increases, and that's largely what that number represents, 2 million. We've then got the impact of the national living wage and the increase on that, which is an increased cost to us of just under 4 million. And then we've got pressures and investments, and we will see significant pressure in 22-23 with more people with needing higher need, particularly in our learning disability area, and we'll come on to that in a bit more detail when we get to it. And then finally, you can see the savings element, so that's savings and where we can increase income of 9.3 million, and again we'll get into more detail about how that number's been made up. But our overall position for adults and health is an increase in cost of just over £6 million. And I've got a couple of caveats, of course. One is that these, and what we're going to talk through this morning, doesn't reflect the implications of the social care reform. And you'll recall we came to the committee and we talked about that at our last committee meeting. That we know that there will be an impact as a result of that, of those reforms, but they're not reflected in these numbers yet. And work is, as we committed to at the last committee, work is going on around that area. And then the second thing that I would say is that it is actually very difficult to accurately predict demand, and that's largely as a result of COVID and the long-term impact of that on both people's health, but also the impact on the demand on our social care services. So I'll stop there before I move on to the next.
So as I say, questions and comments, we'll get into the detailed points on priorities, savings and investments. But in terms of the overall financial position, and in the paper also there's some points about what the current spending is and how that's going. So if people have got any questions or comments about that, then please do. Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Bowden. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks for that, Will. Just two questions for clarification. Under pressures, you talked about the increased demand, but this is shown as a negative. So it must balance out with some investment or something which leads to an overall saving. And I just wonder whether there's any benefit in us understanding the difference between the pressures and the investments. And then the second question, when you describe demand and demography, you said it included elements of inflation, but those are not the contractual inflation. So what elements of inflation do they include, and what rates of inflation have we included so far, and how does that compare with both what's being experienced in the market and what the government is telling us RPI and CPI might be? Thank you.
And today, unusually, I'm going to do one for one, so ask the officers to answer directly. It'll sometimes be Will, and it'll be sometimes one of the other officers, and he'll guide us to whom. If it turns out that we do get too late, then I'll go back to groups. But at the moment, I'm going to do one for one. Will.
Yeah, so if I could answer the second question first, and then I'll pass the question on pressures and investments and what's behind that over to Justin to explain the detail behind that. So the demand and demography is that is very much focused on the increased number of people needing support and the amount of support that they need. The inflation on care costs number, so the 2 million, that is directly linked to our contractual commitments in terms of uplifting rates with providers.
And okay, I thought when you described it, you'd said that there was an element of inflation in demand and demography, because presumably there are some care costs where we don't have a contract. I'm just talking off the top of my head now, where we have we do have inflation demands, thinking of staffing and the like. So I wasn't sure precisely where they were included.
I think when Will was talking about increased costs of care, it's really about increasing need that's coming through. So it's not that bit of inflation. It's about we're seeing more people with higher levels of need than we've seen in the past. So we're seeing increasing numbers of people, but some of those people have got much higher levels of need as well, and that's part of what's driving those demand numbers.
The question though is, where in these tables is inflation that isn't inflation because of contracts, that e.g. for our direct staff, where's that in these tables, and what are the assumptions we're making about inflation? That's Councillor Wilson's question.
So the inflation for our staff...
Again, I'm really sorry to interrupt, but can you put the microphone towards your mouth? Yeah, lovely.
Sorry, it's not the easiest thing to explain either. So the inflation, what we're showing you here was kind of the headline figures for adults. Because of the way that we produce these tables, you've got a combined table for people and communities. So the inflation for the internal staff is wrapped up in a separate line that I haven't drawn attention to specifically here because I've got to pull it apart for peoples and communities. That sits in here. That's the centrally funded inflation you can see on the table of 1.5 million across people and communities. So that sits slightly separately, and that's why we've sort of drawn out the bit that just relates to adult social care delivery rather than the sort of wider element of inflation.
And you were asked, what are the assumptions about inflation?
I would have to dig back into I haven't got the detail of that. I've lost my network connection at the moment, but it's the staff pay, I think, I can't remember. I think it could be 1.5, could be 2, I'm not sure. I'll have to dig back.
Maybe we'll come back to that later in the meeting. Yeah. Hopefully the Wi-Fi sorts itself out. Please carry on. There was a second question, wasn't there?
So the other question was about pressures and investments and why that's a negative number when actually we're looking at a positive number. So what we've set out in this paper is the investments that we are asking you to consider to approve. There are 2 investments that were in last year's business plan that were on an interim basis. So we put the money in and it comes straight back out again in the following year. The biggest one of those was 900,000, which was for PPE equipment for staff. And we put that in last year's business plan because we didn't know we were going to get any other funding for it, and we knew that it was going to be a pressure, but actually then the government came along and funded all of that. So the assumption now is that PPE equipment will continue to be funded, and we'll get the money for that, so that doesn't need to come in. So it was in last year's and it comes straight back out again, and we're not touching those investments from last year. And there's one other one of those which is about care homes, but that is in here. So last year 240 went in, 120 was due to come out in 2022-23, and 120 the following year. That was a 2-year trial for a team to support care homes. That's in here now as a new investment to make that permanent. So it's up and running, it's working well, and the idea now is to make that permanent. So, but that's what's reducing the number on this sort of total table here. When you look at the bottom, the table 3, you'll see these negative numbers as well, but we haven't drawn attention to them into the report because they're not items that you can really make a decision on. They're sort of past decisions that were made in previous years.
Thanks. And on the care homes one, that's coming up later in terms of the possible investments. So we can, if people want to comment or ask about that, there'll be a chance later. Councillor Bowden, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Two very quick points, if I may. The first is on the corporate overview. Almost half of the members of this committee, yourself included, Chair, are new to the Council. So you may be unaware of the way in which we've gone through this process over the last many years. And I have to say, in terms of the challenge that we have ahead of us over the next 5 years and the cumulative challenge, this is the best situation we have seen for a very, very long time indeed. So I just wanted to make the point that you have in fact inherited a far better position than has had to be faced by this council over many years. There's less than £90 million of cumulative budget gap here in the 5-year period. We had some budgets where in a single year you had a jump of 50 or 60 million. So to have an overall cumulative figure of less than 90 million is in fact a very good position to be in. And I know it sounds like an enormous amount of money, and 90 million is a large amount of money, but technically the way in which this is produced is such that with prudent financial management, it is more than a manageable figure. It's a lot more manageable than the figures we've seen in the last few years. The second part of the paper we've got in front of us, the slide, highlights a problem that I'd like to highlight because I think it's quite unhelpful. And I'm not disputing the figures which have been shown here at all, and I'm not either disputing the way in which this is shown in the final accounts and the final budget of the council. But I think it's highly unhelpful to agglomerate the figures both for adults and for public health. Public health is a separate issue. It's a ring-fenced budget, and to put in public health with adults would only make sense if it's being suggested that we may be funding some public health over and above the public health funding that we get from our general budget. Now, if it is being suggested, then fine, it makes sense. Otherwise, to include a ring-fenced budget area with one which is not just causes confusion. And I know that when you dig down, you can start separating it out, but I honestly believe that it's unhelpful to treat public health pressures in the same way that we treat our adults' pressures.
Okay, I did allow that intervention, not least because you're the opposition spokes on this committee, but as I say, it will be up to the public to decide whether a £90 million gap of unfunded commitments is a good or a bad inheritance, and we will have an opportunity to discuss that on other occasions. So we've said that between each other. Let's close that down now for today and do it on other occasions. On your second point, I'm not going to ask the officers to comment because we've decided to amalgamate the committees. Obviously, the budget on health needs to be scrutinised. Whether that's presented in a clear enough way or not, I'm sure the officers have heard that, but if we've got a single combined committee, then we're looking at the budget, we're clearly going to look at the budget for both. Yep.
Sorry, just to come back, that would make sense from a budgetary perspective if it is being suggested that money will be going in from our general funds into public health over and above the public health spend which is ring-fenced. If that's being suggested, then I think you ought to be quite open about that now so that we're aware of it. If it's not, then putting in a ring-fenced spend area into these figures, it does become highly misleading. And it really is not, I'd honestly suggest it's not helpful in decision-making.
Yeah, well, I just beg to differ on that, and it's a political choice to combine the committee. One I completely respect, on which the administration and the opposition disagreed at the time. Hopefully we can move on. But we've got to scrutinise the public health budget because it's not just the fact it's ring-fenced, it's what's inside it. And we have a role as a committee to scrutinise it, and that's why it's in these papers. No, that's enough now. No, that's enough now.
Twice given you the opportunity to answer the question.
No, you've come in twice. It's against the rules to come in a second time, but I'm flexible. But the point has been put fairly and answered.
Sorry,
no.
Chairman, I did ask you, are you planning to put in additional money into the public health sector over and above the amount which is ring-fenced? I did ask twice that question. You haven't answered either time.
Okay, that is a fair question. I apologise if you didn't get an answer for that. No, we're not at present, but it's a perfectly proper not just question, but it would be up to you, anyone else in the committee, to propose that we should do that. And so that is a very fair question, and I acknowledge that. Councillor Ambrose Smith.
Thank you, Chair. It's just an observation, and this was an observation before Councillor Bowden came in, but I think I still ought to make the point, if I may. Looking at the slides which we've got, which are very informative, thank you. The corporate overview and the budget gap to proposed budget gap to 2025-26. If you add that up, that comes to £64 million as a budget gap. And I've just done the calculations on the February budget that was agreed at full council, and that comes to 64,000, but the new one comes to 72 million pounds. So we've got a deficit there, a greater deficit there of £8 million. Where I keep getting the thousands from, I don't know, but it's a bit bigger than that. So just an observation of an £8 million difference over the same period.
Will? Or maybe Justine, up to you.
Yeah, I think.
Justine, please.
I'll have a look at that. I mean, the budget gap is shifting. So when we started this year, in last year's published business plan, the budget gap for this year was 22 million. And then as we do all the work on demand and inflation and pressures and everything, that increases that budget gap. And so it is a moving feast. What was published last year was the position as at last year. So we went up from the 22 million that was published there to 23.5, as Will talked about in September, and now it's coming back down again. So it is a number that's moving all the time until we fix it when we agree the budget in February. Obviously, what we have to do is close that gap for year one, and then there will probably be a continuing gap for future years. Can I just also go back to on Councillor Wilson?
Can I just check, Councillor Ambrose Smith is happy with that answer?
I am, Chair. It's a moving feast, isn't it? And I appreciate that. But just to reiterate in my mumbled fashion that going to 24-25, there will be a £8 million difference to greater in this forecast compared to what it was in February. But I appreciate all the things. It's just a problem.
I think that's a comment, so that doesn't need reply, but you wanted to just come back on something else.
I wanted to come back on Councillor Wilson's question, because actually the answer is in the table buried down. So the staff pay inflation is assumed at 2% for years 1 and 2 and 1% for years 3 to 5.
And to everyone watching online, that means the Wi-Fi has started working again in Alconbury Weald, so you'll be deeply relieved that that's happened. Thank you very much. Any more on this section 1 of 4? In this report. Yeah, Councillor Wilson again.
Sorry, I just wanted to come back on the inflation assumptions. For 1.5% pay increase for staff when inflation is running at 4% or so seems remarkably low to me, and I would have expected a higher figure to have been incorporated. And the second thing is, when we get to the joint administration priorities, there are a number of mentions of health. So I think it's slightly misleading for us to say to Councillor Bowden, there's no proposals to increase investment in health, because we are trying to address health inequalities, and we're trying to do something about mental health, and there are other things like that we will, when we get to that section, we will be able to explain.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to add to that, but it was clearly put. On your first point, I would guess at the Strategy and Resources Committee, that's the place for us to look at whether the pay increase element's the right for the whole authority. I don't think that's a special item for this committee, so I'm not going to ask for an answer on that, because I think it opens up another whole debate that isn't really in the purview of our committee. Any more on this section 1 from any members? Councillor van der Ven.
Just a small comment following on from Councillor Wilson. When we use the term health in our papers, I think we need to be clear as to when we mean NHS and when we mean public health, because these are two different things. So perhaps we could endeavour to begin to do that going forward. Thanks.
Any more? Okay. I'm not going to say any more about health, even though I'm really tempted to, but I'm not going to do it at this point of the proceedings. So that deals with section 1. We now move to section 2, please, Will.
Yes, thank you. So we're now going to turn to the initiatives we're proposing that contribute to the joint administration priorities, and as part of this we seek kind of views and comments to help inform the further development of the business cases around these. It's very difficult to see on the screen. You've got a printed copy. You can see on the left-hand side the joint administrative priorities. You can see the proposals as they currently stand, the cost, and then an indication of future cost for 23-24 onwards. I just want to say that the costs that we're showing are indicative. There is again, as part of the iterative process, there's quite a bit of work going on in these areas, but those numbers are indicative, although we don't expect them to change hugely. But what I would like to do is talk through each of the proposals, and they're also detailed in the paper. So starting off with the increased support for carers, the carers are a most valuable resource in our communities, and what we're proposing here is to increase support for carers in a number of areas, and specifically carer support, particularly when there is an emergency. We want to increase the capacity of the listening ear service, which is a service that's provided in the community for carers to support carers with kind of everyday support. We want to roll out short breaks for carers, and we'd like to run a media campaign to what we've termed, not particularly termed, target hidden carers. So we obviously don't know all of the carers, and we think it's important that we do understand and get a better view of who is at all those carers that aren't that we don't necessarily know about. The second one is the that's contributing to this is the Care Together initiative, and this is about changing the way we commission domiciliary care specifically, I suppose, in essence. So this is where currently we commission home care. It's on a time and task basis. We have carers going up and down the A14 delivering personal care to people, and we want to change that model. The model is fraught with difficulties. So, for example, the attrition rate of carers, the workforce providing that care, is over 20%. Carers are spending a significant amount of time travelling and actually not spending as much time, or not necessarily meeting the needs of the people that they're caring for, in terms of, when people need to be cared for is a really good example of that. And what this initiative is wanting to do is to change that model and do that county-wide. We've got currently one pilot. We want to roll it out county-wide, and the principle of that is that we have carers who live and work in their own community, and that's not on a time and task basis. It's more on a caseload type basis. And so what I mean by caseload is they're looking after people that in the community on a long-term basis. So, people who are receiving care don't have necessarily different carers coming in all the time. They can build a proper relationship with their carer, and that those carers work with and alongside other resources in the community, be that the GP, the community nurse, the social worker, the people from the voluntary sector, and what have you. And we think that would not only dramatically improve the outcomes of people that are needing care, but also, from a carer's perspective, you know, it's a much more sort of rewarding environment to work within. The third one is around expansion of direct payments. So, and we've talked about this before. So, this is asking for additional capacity. This is an area where we want to expand the use of direct payments. The priority is about enhancing choice and control, and direct payments directly allows that to happen. We then move on to our independent living services. So this is, again, a big shift away from the way we currently commission residential-based care, where people are in effect residents, and we want to move to a tenancy model where you know, people can in effect live in their own home as a tenant and not have to move from one type of provision to another type of provision. So, for example, having to move from a residential care home to a nursing home, rather than move those individuals, we want those individuals to be tenants in their own home and actually move the care and change the care to meet their needs instead. What we're proposing is so we've already got the Prince of Wales site planned, and a site, the Riola site up near Huntingdon, and we want to expand to offer another 3 additional sites. We then move on to the real living wage. So, and we want to roll this out to our social care providers over a phased period, over 3 years or so in increments. And we want to do that with as a way of supporting, actually, the significant amount of carers that we have in living and working across Cambridgeshire. And linked to that, we want to find a way of delivering social value in return for that. And as I've said before, we're still working on what that might look like in terms of social value, and we've started conversations with our provider market, who are, and the early indication is that they're really keen and really up for having those discussions, which we're really, really kind of positive and delighted about, actually. I'm going to hand over to Jyoti because there's some public health priorities.
Okay. So, thank you. These 2 priorities are related to the impact of COVID. So COVID that has both had a direct and indirect impact on health-related behaviours and health outcomes, as well as exposing and exacerbating health inequalities. So these are about tackling those and recognising that much of what the council does in its day-to-day activities has either a direct or indirect impact on health outcomes. So these 2 proposals are complementary. The first one is a one-off training package to support other parts of the council in identifying the health impacts of their day-to-day activities, and also providing training on health impact assessments, what the purpose of them is and the basics of health impact assessments and when it might be beneficial to carry them out. And that's a one-off spend of 45k, which will be paid from public health reserves. The second proposal is about supporting other parts of the council in regularly carrying out health impact assessments to identify ways in which they can maximise health improvements and minimise health harms through the day-to-day activities of the council. And that is a 125k budget, and that will be used to support other parts of the council in carrying out a prioritised programme of health impact assessments on an annual basis, and that will be paid for through savings identified through demand-led services where the demand has not been as high as we expected it to be, and that will be paid for on a regular basis. Thank you.
So those are the priorities broken down into the 5 areas. I'll take...
Chairman, may I raise a point of order? May I raise a
point of order I'll take, of course.
Thank you. May I suggest, given the discrete nature of these 5 items, that we take each of the 5 separately, otherwise we could be jumping from one area to another. It might help the debate, Chairman.
Yeah, that's a very helpful suggestion, thank you. So can you go back to the previous slide, who's operating the slides? That's the one. That's the one. So the first one is the issue around care together and the different format of commissioning. Anyone want to ask questions? Yes, Councillor Slatter.
I'm afraid that I think that the health of the public doesn't really respect these sort of boundaries that Councillor Bowden is suggesting. So forgive me if I'm actually making comments and asking questions that refer to more than one of these at once, because they blur. People are like that. We've used this word carers. We know perfectly well that this is not a place for clear boundaries. We all look after our families. Some of us look after our parents increasingly as years go by, and our children hopefully decreasingly as years go by until they start looking after us. We must not, I think, as a caring council, try and compartmentalise too much. To my mind, the word domiciliary care, I know it makes sense and things have to be put in the budget with headings. I've been both a professional and an amateur domiciliary carer, and I'm well aware of the need for family care and also the low-key professional care. Let me bring your attention to some of the points: the human condition, death taxes, your nails growing and your facial hair. These are all personal matters for people. They don't necessarily want to talk about any of those. But be sure there is nothing to sure as your nails will grow. And if we don't enable people as they get older who can't reach their own nails to cut them when they need to be, they will start to be disabled by foot problems. It's an obvious thing, but it's something that public health doesn't cope with well. The NHS doesn't cope with at all. And the other day, somebody was telling me about these community catalysts. The idea that we might be able to encourage people to have small businesses, and this fits beautifully into trying to make it neighbourhood care. We all see adverts for nail bars. You can see I probably don't know a lot about them, but there are a lot of younger people, independent people, people with children who find part-time work and invest in doing nail bars, and they're also well able to just doing ordinary nail care. And with the right sort of health input, and I've done the NHS social nail care, it's called, training, you can then be giving it's usually older, but not necessarily, also disabled people, that sort of pampering feeling, which is also public health. So if somebody has somebody come in and give them a facial, it's an awful lot nicer, more acceptable, and not necessarily more expensive for the public purse than me going in as a professional and having to rather quickly shave a woman patient. So let's bear this in mind, please, and consider, and this is where it comes into the Cosmic Committee and also the Children and Health Committee, there are ways in which the neighbourhood can be enabled to look after people in the neighbourhood, advertise on social media, and get those sort of things going. I throw that in. I'm sorry to take so long, but what I was going to ask is, when you say social value, is that the sort of thing you mean, whereby you have a nice relationship with this nice young woman who comes in and does my face, much better than the nurse having to do it quickly after everything else?
I thought that was a brilliant intervention and exactly what people worry about. Thank you so much. Will is our expert on nail bars.
My secret's out. First of all, I think an apology. So the way that I described the care together, I sort of went straight to the essence. And you're absolutely right. And this presentation doesn't, and what I've said doesn't do justice, I suppose, to what it is that we are actually trying to do, which is, as you've described. And there are different strands to that. So, for example, and you'll see later in the presentation, we talk about micro enterprises. and there is investment in for micro enterprises. It's a really, really important initiative for us, because it does do exactly the sort of, we hope, the sort of things that you describe. And but it's how we join these things up together. And that, for example, when we think about the Care Together work, the way domiciliary care is commissioned currently just doesn't allow us to do that, because, you know, carers are sort of going from one destination to another. That they're not living and working in their own community. They're not, you know, working with those people who've got ideas or want to start a business, or, you know, be that a nail business or whatever. And I suppose that is the essence of a lot of, or most of, the things that we are talking about as part of the initiatives around the joint administration priorities. It's exactly that. It's so I don't know if that's answered your question or not, but
It wasn't really a question, was it? It was a bit of a rant. But
and I think I'd probably just reciprocated that. But it is exactly that. That is our intention and our purpose. It's very difficult to portray that in a paper that's talking about business planning.
I thought it was a good question, but also a good answer, because this is all about not just being stuck with big county-wide contracts with big providers that are inflexible. It's about finding new and more flexible solutions based on people's needs. So I thought that was a very good question and a very good answer. Just watching the time, I'm now going to take all the people on this first priority and then ask for one set of answers just to keep us on track. Councillor Bird is next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I love the idea of Care Together expansion. I do worry, though, about carers that we don't know about. And I just wondered if there was a way we could get the doctors to help us in that way, because we know there are many families in that situation and don't know what's there to help them. My other thing was the carers that actually come to your house. It would be fantastic if they lived in the area, because you know then that the client would get the time they should have, not 15 minutes and gone. So I think that is a great initiative. The direct payments, I don't think is...
But we'll come back to direct payments if you don't
Okay.
mind, Councillor Bird.
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah, no, but those two points, good.
Yeah.
Councillor Bowden is next.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, since Councillor Slater mentioned my comment earlier, I think I do need
Slater.
Apologies.
Slater.
Councillor
I'm sure it
Slater, I
wasn't
do
deliberate, though.
apologise.
Councillor Bowden.
Given that I was mentioned earlier, I think I do need to explain to members of this committee the importance of the compartmentalisation between adults and public health. And whilst Councillor Slater is entirely correct to say that there is a continuum from pure adults work to pure public health, nevertheless, from a legal and an accounting point of view, it is absolutely essential for us, especially in our budgeting, to differentiate between the adults work, which goes through our general reserve, and the public health going through the public health funding that we've got. So both for governance and for accounting purposes, that compartmentalisation is absolutely essential for us to do, and it's part of our job. So I thought Councillor Slater might find it helpful for that to be pointed out.
I said
so
No,
far as
Councillor
the-
Slater, no. Please,
so
please
far,
finish.
so far as the items here is concerned, this process of creating new models based on delivery at neighbourhood level is something which former County Councillor Anna Bailey pushed forward very strongly over the last few years as chairman of the Adults Committee, and I very much support it as well. And I primarily support it not because it is more efficient and more effective in financial terms, but because of the quality improvements that it can provide. But I think it's quite important that we separate out those quality advantages that we get and the financial advantages that we get, and that we are quite open about where the mix is. And at the moment, we're really not given that information. We've got, we're told here that 4.45 million of one-off reserve funding would be used. I'm assuming that would be from the General Reserve. It's not stated that it is. But I am quite unclear, first of all, as to the expected longer-term revenue expectation. And it's stated here that it will be a £50,000 saving from 23-24 onwards. And if that is the long-term projection from this, I would be a little bit disappointed. But secondly, it's not explained to us how that is separated out in terms of the effect in terms of quantity, which will be involved here as well, not merely quality. So I think that a greater expansion of the information would be really helpful for us to see exactly what it is that we are proposing to spend, what the short-term revenue costs may be, what we're expecting the longer-term revenue savings to be, but also how much improvement we are hoping for in terms of quality, because I think that that is really important. And whilst I know that we're here to set a budget, we have to bear in mind also that we're talking about the quality of the services that are provided, and this model provides the opportunity for a significant improvement in quality. Thank you, Chairman.
On the second question, very good question, and I'll ask the officers to respond. On the first question, to avoid Councillor Slatter or anyone else coming in, let's just put on the record, every single member of this committee understands our legal responsibilities for the ring-fence public health grant. The idea that you need to explain it to us, I just don't think flies at all. So let's just record that for the record and move on from that point. Councillor van der Ven.
Thanks. Just a comment on our language and terminology. As much as we need to get rid of corporate speak, we also need to be clear, I think, when we're talking about carers and the role of unpaid carers and social work carers. I might just ask if we could seek somehow to clarify that as we're going along, because in the budget we are talking about two different things.
So I think I've got one more somewhere before you come in, Will. It's Councillor Howell, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of quick points with regards to the carers living in the community. That's always been a troubled situation, because then the carers are never really off duty. And even when I'm talking about professional carers here who do it for a living, as opposed to those who live with the person they care for, who are never off duty as well. And also the fact that sometimes, and what has often happened, is that they get knocked on the door when they're not on duty with the famous quote, "Oh, I know you're not on duty, but it's only me." And that then led to people then getting burnt out. The most obvious example was the old warden service, where that happened, where wardens were burnt out very, very quickly. So that's a concern of mine. What would be far better is if we could, to have a cluster of service users together, as opposed to a particular carer in that particular area, where one or two carers look after those particular cluster in that village, and they can go from one to the other, but not necessarily living in the village themselves. But however, we must remember the final thing: we mustn't take away the choice of the service users to employ the carers that they wish to perform the care and most intimate tasks for them. Just some concerns, Chairman. Thank you.
Good questions. Anyone else? Will.
Thank you. So if I could answer the point raised by Councillor Bowden on the cost and quality, and I think Charlotte will come in and answer the questions around the carers. Yes, absolutely. And as we said at the start, this is an iterative process. We are seeking views and comments to inform the development of the business cases. Those business cases will come back to this committee in December, and they will articulate the impact on outcomes for people, so the quality, the costs, and any revenue and savings implications as part of those business cases.
Was that an answer, though, about how do we, Councillor Bowden's question, how do we quantify quality? I think that was, in summary, your second point. Could you just say a bit more about that? Sorry. Improvements in quality, I think, was the question.
I think I can help with that question. Thank Thank you. So we get a lot of feedback from the people we support in terms of the quality of their care. The sort of things that really matter to them are the level of personalisation, which was in essence referred to earlier, the consistency in terms of, is it always the same person coming, and actually the flexibility in terms of if my needs change, does the care change? So I think we've got some really quite clear ways of measuring quality. If I could help answer the other questions that were raised as well in the discussion. So in terms of carers and particularly the role of GPs, there is a requirement that each GP practice will have a carers register. That obviously requires the practice to take that forward, and there are lots of requirements of GPs that are quite challenging at times for them to achieve. But one of the benefits of the vaccination programme is that actually for carers to get their vaccination from their GP, they did actually have to be on the register. So that did increase the number of people on the register. So that's a positive. A lot of private practices now have social prescribers as well, who are really good at working with groups like carers and coming up with sort of non-medical, because often it's not medical issues that the carers necessarily want help with, it's about managing their caring responsibilities. But it's very much, the reason it's down as a proposal, it's very much an area where we'd like to do more and do better. There are a lot of carers that don't actually identify themselves as carers and wouldn't want to be seen as carers, but in essence they are, and somehow we've got to develop solutions which also cater for those people who see it as in essence part of their relationship with their family member is to be their carer, but they wouldn't identify as a carer. So we have to be a bit more flexible about language, which obviously we'll do in the campaign. And in terms of just on terminology, I think that's a fair challenge from Councillor Van der Ven. I think we need to distinguish between what we call family or informal carers and paid carers. The other thing I would like to say in terms of the Neighbourhood Cares project is this very much builds on that. So the Neighbourhood Cares project was trying a different approach to social work practice. Actually, the social workers who did that work said it was probably the best job they'd ever had. They absolutely loved it. They loved the fact it was a patch that they could identify with. They didn't all live exactly in that patch, but they live nearby. But we learned quite a lot about the boundaries that you have to put in place when you're working in that way, and the micro enterprises and community catalyst kind of schemes that have been in place across the country. We'll learn a lot from them about how you make sure that by someone being a local carer, they don't end up, in essence, doing that when they're not expecting to. But the critical thing is actually about the flexibility of the role. So I think that this proposal will very much build on that, because it's the bit we didn't manage to do in neighbourhood cares is we didn't actually, I think, manage to change the way in which we commissioned. So we identified different ways of practicing social work, but we didn't really tackle the issues around commissioning. So as from my perspective, it very much builds on that. I hope that's helpful.
I think that last point about we're changing the way we commission is really important. I think Councillor Bowden's point about quantifying the expected or desired increase in quality is a very fair point. So we measure it, but I don't think you got a full answer on that. So rather than come back on that, that will be noted, and I hope part of the later discussions. Okay, so that deals with priority number 1. Priority number 2, direct payments. Now, we'll take Councillor Bird first after the presentation, because I know she wants to talk about this. Will. Direct payments. I'm sorry, I got so immersed in it, in which case I stopped you wrongly, Councillor Bird, so I really apologise about that. Will.
So I think we've covered the, and had some questions about Care Together. I think we've covered increased support for carers as part of that. So we are questions around direct payments.
Yeah. Well, that's what I thought. Whether it's my mistake or not, it doesn't matter. We'll deal with direct payments. Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, direct payments is a hard thing for a lot of families to be able to get. They can't do the forms. I know there is help for them, but then you've got families where the parents perhaps can't read or write. So we have to take that into account. So then they don't bother. So I think we need to do something that way. Also, we need to advertise that we can help them to get this money so they can get their own carers, employ their own carers. So if we could advertise it more, I think that'd be great. They're just a couple of points I've come across. All right.
Thank you. Anyone else on direct payments? Now, I'm just going to add, I'm very keen on this. Ask the question, how are we doing? And we are underperforming compared with other councils. I'm absolutely convinced that's not the staff or any sort of blockage like that. It's just that we should spend more time publicising it, as Councillor Bird says, and promoting it, and that we can redress the gap. And the officers have come up with this plan to do so. So I'm very enthusiastic about this. Will?
So I'll hand over to Charlotte on
Charlotte
payment,
again.
sorry.
It is great the way the officers work as a team. So I hope people are impressed, not impressed that we are coordinating between the different officer answers. Charlotte.
So yeah, direct payments is really good practice. We have some, actually going back to the nails example, we have some fantastic examples of where direct payments are used, particularly around people with learning disabilities, and people have come up with really creative solutions to their care needs, which we never could have come up with from a kind of officer perspective because they're very personalised. But you're absolutely right, Councillor Bird. Part of the reason this is down here is because we need to work harder at really making them as accessible as possible to people. One change that we have made fairly recently is we've introduced a prepaid card for someone for a direct payment. So basically, it's all held on a card. It's much easier to manage and administer. And we also have an arm's length organisation that helps people manage their direct payments. I think one of the main barriers that we hear about, and I hear about from social workers a lot, is actually now needing to have more carers or more people who are prepared to operate through a direct payment, who are called personal assistants. Or PAs, which is another sort of term that's sort of developed and isn't necessarily that clear, but really the main barrier often is actually having enough people to do that, and in an area where there's quite a lot of employment, often it's not something that people will step forward to do. So we need to basically find a way to make it more appealing to people and, as you say, make it as unbureaucratic as possible.
Thanks. Now, I'll take, Will, your guidance, but I think we're on independent living services, are we? We are, so that's good that we're both on the same page. Will? I'm sorry, I'm just looking at the list as well. I've got, so thank you for that. Councillor Howell.
Very quickly on the direct payments, I want to agree with what's just been said. The difficulty is very much we all want flexibility, but it gives so much flexibility that the PAs, the personal assistants, are not secure with regards to their own job and income. And that is a difficulty that we have found with direct payments, or I have found with direct payments in the past, that actually getting people to be carers, have got the regular income, they know their times, they know their set times and what they're going to work. With direct payments, it can be very ad hoc, and you have to mostly be self-employed, and PAs do struggle with that. And when you get a good PA, you do tend to hang on to them no matter what happens and what they do. So it is a difficult situation that we currently find ourselves, added to the fact that we're in an area of moderately high employment as well.
Thanks. It's great that you've got such experience to bear. We love having Councillor Hay here, but hopefully you can come more regularly because these are great contributions. Thank you. Councillor Bowden, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a very great supporter of the independent living proposals. Again, something which Councillor Bailey particularly pushed in the previous administration. So very much support what's being proposed here. However, I feel that some of the numbers are less than clear to us, and again it's going to be really important that we do get these numbers fully into context, particularly when we're talking about the spending of reserves and the capital spend. Now, we're told in the slides that there will be capital investment required, and that will be in addition to the revenue costs quoted. Then we're told that one-off revenue investment is required and reserves could be used of 300,000 in total. Now, I haven't been able to square that with what appeared in the papers which were published for this meeting, where we see £40 million of capital one-off costs being listed. in the second paragraph, there are two paragraph 4.5.4s. In the second paragraph 2.5.4, it gives that £40 million. So I'm quite unclear what this £300,000 refers to, which is mentioned in the slide we've got in front of us. But in addition, on 4.5.4, we're told that there is expected revenue savings, recurrent savings, that is, so increasing savings, of 557,000 in 26-27 and 418,000 in 27-28. But again, in the slides, we're told the 557 is in 24-25 and the 418 in 25-26. So I think it would be helpful to know which of the two, if either, is actually correct. And my final comment on this section is to do with the real living wage and the final comment which is made in the slide, which that it is linked to delivering social...
Can we just come back to the real living wage? The first two
okay.
points, absolutely,
Fine.
but I'll bring you in when we get to the real living wage. We're on independent living services at the moment. Thank you. Councillor Bird.
Sorry, Chair, me again. Independent living, now that's a very important thing to anybody with a disability. They want to stay at home. They want to live like anybody else does. So my worry is that we don't get the right equipment to help these people. I'd like to know how the OT's waiting list is, the occupational therapists, because that is a big issue. Because if you can't get an occupational therapist to come to your home to see about having a shower, a wet room done, you could wait months and months and months, and they'll give you a stupid board that goes across the bath. Sorry, Chair, for saying that, but goes through across the bath, and you can slip off of it and do more damage. So I think we need to look at the OTs and try and get that waiting list down, and then people will be able to live independent and may not need to be with the service as much. So this is a big issue, even in the kitchen. If their units are lower, if they're in a wheelchair or something, then they won't burn themselves when they want to make a cup of tea or something, which causes more hassle again. So that's a big issue, the OT list. We need to have a look at that.
Thank you, and just say, I think it's important that the frustrations of the difficulties and challenges are heard at this committee, so I fully accept those comments in that spirit. Obviously, we love our OTs, and I bet you the people that are most worried about OT waiting times are the OTs themselves, but I'm sure we'll hear about that in a second. Not quite yet, but in a second. Councillor Slatter.
Thank you. Following on very well from Jerry there, I wanted to express my concern and ask questions regarding the possible overlaps here between the district council services and the county council. Now, to me, from my experience in the Cambridge City, independent living services means the stuff that we did based in Bitchburn Place, which was a combination of residential care, full care, 24-hour job, ranging to supported rentals, and then out in the community, alarms round your neck or whatever. That and a really good service. And that was enabling what Jerry is saying, keeping people ideally living in their own homes. Now, when I needed an OT as a nurse or for my mother, I went through the city council, possibly because I understood the city council. And I'm hoping that we don't have actually two lots of your OTs, one with a long waiting list and one without. But the OT that'll come at 7:30 and watch me give somebody a shower, that's the one I want. And there again, the locally based ones, where you get a good name, people get to know people. So that's a question. Can we please get the best advice we can from the district councils? Can we make sure we know what they're already doing? I mean, as I say, we've been doing independent living services in Cambridge for decades, and I'm sure in other cities and villages as well, associated with old people's bungalows in many villages, or mobile wardens, all those sort of things. We need to really make sure, and I'm sure that officers are well networked in, but we mustn't ignore that. And the other thing is almshouses. They have a tremendous amount of expertise in looking after older people, and they have managed this gentle giving you help when it's needed, taking it away again when you're better, bringing it in again, that sort of thing. And there are almshouses around the county. We could probably build more. There are plenty of local authorities that build almshouses, and that's often quite a good model for independent living, or certain for some people. So those are the things really. Let's make sure we're not duplicating as well as not having gaps.
In the 1930s, my grandfather was an independent inspector of almshouses before there was anything called social care. Sadly, he died young, but it shows that that model has been around for some time. On the discrepancies in the, or comparisons on the report that Councillor Bowden raised, I guess that's Justine. And then on the OTs, that will be Charlotte. Justine first.
Okay, so there are 3 separate schemes related to independent living, which I think is probably where the confusion is coming from. So the savings that you are seeing in 2024-25 and 25-26 in the tables relate to the Princess of Wales development, which is already in the capital programme. It's already approved, it's already going ahead. What you're then seeing as the capital investment and the savings that come from that is the new development of 3 extra sites. The 300,000 relates to the project cost for Riola, which is a slightly different model, and Will can probably explain to you better than I can the difference between a build and a buy, as we call them. But what will happen with the capital projects, because we're doing them ourselves, we can capitalise all of those costs. But because Riola is an external party doing that for us, then we have to have that as revenue costs. We can't capitalise it. So there are 3 different strands, and I think probably the best thing we can do when we bring it back in December is split out the Riola one from the 3, and then I think that will help to aid understanding.
Thank you, Chairman. I did have the further question that it appeared highly unlikely that we were delivering savings of 557 in 24-25 and 418,000 in 25-26, as in the slides we've got, and then, according to the papers which you've sent out for this meeting, there'll be a further 557,000 in 26-27 and 418,000 in 27-28. Is that a mistake, or there appears to be something which is wrong there?
Yes, I think maybe the savings, if that's what the slides are saying in terms of the savings. So what you'll see in the tables is 244 in 24-25 and 162. That's the Princess of Wales bit that's already done. And then there are no further savings expectations until 26-27, when we've got those 3 new sites, assuming that they were to be approved and go ahead.
I'm going to take that as an answer because I think the slide was drawn up slightly later, and if there is a discrepancy, it's because these numbers keep moving. And I think Justine has properly said, when we come back in December, we'll divide it out so that so can we just say that point has been heard and will be acted upon?
May I just request, Chairman?
I am going to stop you there. Councillor Bowden, please respect the Chair's decision. Charlotte.
Yes, thank you for the questions about occupational therapy. Really important professional group, actually very hard to recruit at the moment. In Cambridgeshire, our occupational therapy service is delivered by the Mental Health Trust, so by CPFT, so they form part of the multidisciplinary team working alongside district nurses and others. So this is one of the areas where we have what we call a Section 75 agreement, which is just a technical term. We do monitor the waiting list quite carefully, so actually there have been some quite significant improvements recently, and one of the things we were concerned about was that a lot of the occupational therapists were diverted through the pandemic to sort of essential health tasks. So we have been in discussion with CPFT about that and making sure we get things back on track, because we're very aware of the impact of particularly the adaptations in people's homes not being completed quickly enough. We are retendering our community service, community equipment service as well. And just to confirm, we do work really closely with district councils. So obviously the district council holds the disabled facilities grant and the occupational therapists sit within the NHS. So, it's not as seamless as it could be. I think I would agree with that. But I also think that a lot of work is happening at the moment on this. And Will's got someone in his team called Lisa Sparks who does an awful lot of work on this. But I think you're right to highlight the issue, and I think if at some point the committee wanted a more detailed report on that arrangement from CPFT, I think that would be probably a useful thing, could even be picked up as a scrutiny item potentially. I'm not sure. We'd have to think about that, but it's certainly something I think we should be keeping you informed about.
Thanks. Could that last point go in the minutes, just as a comment, but I think we wouldn't want to forget that one. I am going to drive us on, and we're going to move to the real living wage next, I believe. Can someone nod at me? Well, yeah. And Councillor Bowden wanted to come in on that first.
Thank you. One very brief comment on this, which is the final line on the slides which have been provided today, and that is that this is linked to delivering social value in return. And I've thought about this, and it feels to me that that is meaningless at worst and irrelevant at best. But maybe someone could expand on exactly what the social value is which will be given in return for this. Thank you.
I will let the officers answer, but it's a huge priority for this council and the new administration on social value, but I'll let the officers provide the answer in the detail. Anybody else on the real living wage, please? The only part I'd like to say before the officers come back is when you read this, it's not just about the real living wage. It's about training, it's about career development, it's about respect and the culture of respect for care workers, and it's about the conditions that they work under. So I think it's easy for us to say this is just about the wages they get, but it is more than that, and I think I just would want to draw attention to that. It's obviously going to be a long-term phased area of work and priority for us, but I just would want to indicate that, because otherwise I think we just have a discussion about one thing without looking at the broader context, and that all of this is justified, one, for dignity for the care workers, but two, it then leads to them staying longer and providing better care, so it's better for the users, and I think we should always remember the connection between the two. Will?
Yeah, so I suppose when we talk about social value in return in this sense, what we're talking about is working with our providers about what and how they can contribute, not necessarily in financial terms, but in other ways to their local communities and the people living in their local communities for the benefit of that particular local community. So, and that can come in a number of different guises and different ways. And, so it might be, for example, a care home using their facilities. It might be catering or something, for example, and contributing and supporting, catering requirements in the community. It can be, providing lunch clubs, for example. It can be for carers, for example. So I don't think there is a specific answer to your question. I think it will vary depending upon the particular community and the particular provider. And we'll come back in December with the outcome of the discussions with our providers about what that is and what that might look like and what they are able to contribute in terms of, social value.
And just for all members, there have been 2 seminars or webinars run by Democratic Services on social value and what it means. I don't blame anyone for not being able to be there, but I think the recordings of those are available, and we've got people in Tom Kelly's team that are really driving this. So this isn't just an issue for adults and health, it's an issue for the authority as a whole, and I invite people to look at some of those resources if absolutely constructively and respectfully you haven't had a chance to see them. Can we just go on to the next slide, please, whoever's doing the slides? Someone's doing the slides. So we're now doing the health inequalities, population health management, health in all policies, the training on health in all policies, and the impact assessments, health impact assessments. So can I invite questions and comments around that, please? Councillor Daunton.
Yeah, thank you.
Lovely.
I'm sorry, Chairman.
Again, can you just point towards your mouth?
Is that better? Yeah. It was actually a question in relation to the last item, if I could just come back to that. Are you talking to the providers about recruitment And if you could say something about the problems of recruitment and the impact that that will have.
Yeah. Did you want to come in? No. Well, just straight away, just so that we make sure that is answered.
Yeah, so in terms of, in relation to social value, for example, it would, that might be that our providers recruit people from the local community, they take on apprenticeships, they train them and support them and so forth would be an absolute example of that.
Okay, yes, that was the point I was going to make, that they could play a part in recruitment and that would be social value. Yeah.
On health or on that, just...
I just wanted to make a comment on workforce issues generally. This has come up in each of the sections, and just to acknowledge the work that the workforce is doing, the pressures on OTs, for example, to express gratitude for the workforce that we have, who are under enormous pressure. And I did have some help from officers this week in trying to tackle a waiting list for the home adaptations service through CPFT, and that was resolved, and it was an insight into the pressures that everyone's under on the providing side and on the receiving side. Also to note that the Care Together model, if I understand, does a really useful asset mapping to stock taking of where in a community we have resource and support, and trying to match those up. So just wanted to make those points before we move on to the next section. Thanks.
Thank you. That point about how much we value what our staff is doing, I'm sure is on behalf of all of us, and if that can go in the notes as well, because I'd certainly ally myself, and I think all of us, with what Councillor van der Ven has said. I think that was a comment, not a question, so I am going to move us on to the health training and the health impact assessments. Who'd like to come in? Councillor Bowden, please.
Thank you very much. We're on the targeting of health inequalities now, are we? Or have I got the right place?
We're on health training, so that we can do the health in all policies across the authorities. It's essentially training of non-health staff in health.
Fine.
And then we're on to the health impact assessments we're going to bring in to bring in external assistance on a small number of big strategic projects at the discretion of the Director of Public Health.
I just want to make sure I got the sections right that you were taking now. I thank Jyoti for making it clear that we are, when we're talking about one-off reserve funding being required, that we are talking about the utilisation of the Public Health Reserve, which is entirely appropriate, and I fully support what's being done here. And I note the additional 125,000 that we're talking about for the health impact assessments, and again, highly relevant and very interested to hear, not totally surprised, but very interested to hear that that is being funded by, I'm assuming, 22-23's expectation for demand-led volumes being lower than expected rather than 21-22's. But that comes back to a more fundamental point. I'm very happy to support what's on this page, but what I don't see and what hasn't been presented to us is an exposition of what the public health budget is. It is going to be in 22-23, or even where we are now in 21-22, where so far as the Public Health Reserve is concerned. Because they're talking about a very large amount of money. We've been suffering a public health crisis for the last 18 months, and in fact we continue to suffer public health crises which follow from the COVID-19 effects. So we're in a desperate position in a number of different ways, not directly concerned with COVID-19, and I would very much like to see a significant amount of public health reserve being used for interventions now, or in 22-23, to start to ameliorate some of the public health issues that we've got. Yet, we're not even presented with the numbers to see what the public health reserve position is to do that, let alone actually any proposals to do something. And I think it's absolutely essential, if we're talking about what we're going to be proposing for the budget for 22-23, that at least some of the very large amount of public health reserve which is building up, and probably will build up even further in 22-23 with demand-led services not meeting budget, I think it's really important that something is put forward in the budget to fulfil our public health function. In addition to what we've already budgeted for. We've got the opportunity to do it. There's a significant reserve there. We're in a crisis situation, and I really do think that I'm really surprised that we aren't seeing more here, and I'm hoping that come December we'll see something quite significant which will be brought forward, which will, in the whole host of different ways of doing it. I'm not going to tell Jyoti how to do her job. There are lots of different ways of doing this, but I'm really disappointed not to see anything beyond what we see here.
And you don't have to answer this, of course, but have you got any examples of the sorts of areas where you think that spending could be beneficial?
I'm going to have to leave the meeting in the next 30 minutes or so I'm going to be limited to the amount of answer I can give you, I'm afraid, Chairman, on that. But if you want one immediate thing, let's just look at children's mental health, for example, and the situation there. There are lots of different areas, and Jyoti could list them. But children's mental health is one prime example where we've got a real issue developing. It's not just in Cambridgeshire, obviously. It's right across the country. But given the crisis that we've got in that area, it's, in my opinion, irresponsible for us not to utilise the opportunity which the Public Health Reserve gives us to address some of the issues which exist, such as that. And there are lots of other issues which are public health issues which have grown as a result of the COVID-19 crisis. But that's one which immediately strikes me as one which is so serious and so underrated in terms of its importance.
Fair question and a good example. So when we come to it, I'll take other members first. But when we come to it, I'll get Justine to answer about where all the figures are and how they're presented and how they could be presented better. And I'll get Jyoti to answer about her thinking about the use of the reserve and what's possible, hearing the question. Councillor van der Ven.
Thanks. Just a general comment. I'm really delighted to see this move, because the time has come that we really are able to implement health and all policies, and I think through that greater understanding we will have a better handle on what we can do as a local authority to improve public health. So it's an absolutely fundamental exercise.
And I agree with Councillor van der Ven. I think to change the whole authority to introduce health in all policies is obviously not, you don't just do that overnight by saying you're going to do it, and that these are very practical examples about how we can step towards doing that more successfully over the next year. And so I'm very, very supportive of what's planned here. I'll take Justine before Jyoti, because Justine, it's a presentation, tables, getting the presentation right point. Justine.
Okay, so if I just start with the savings and the sort of reduction in demand, it's not really a reduction in demand for future years. We are already on the areas that we're talking about taking savings from. We've been seeing underspends on for quite some years. COVID's made that worse because GPs have been focused on the vaccination programme and other things. But so we've already effectively delivered those savings. It's not like we are actually reducing anything. They're already there. In terms of reserves, the public health reserve balance at the moment is 4.5 million. You're absolutely right. Jyoti and I have talked about that, and we've got meetings lined up with absolutely the intention of bringing it to December with some things to discuss in terms of public health reserves. The current year underspend is about 1.3 million for public health. So, as you say, that would then also be expected to go to the public health reserve at the end of the year. So that would get bigger. And just in terms of some of the earlier discussions, just to clarify, in terms of the tables that we will do for business planning, there is one for adults and for people and communities with adults in it, and there is a separate one for public health. And there isn't any intention to change that. So you will still be able to see that public health ring fence very clearly presented in the business plan.
Jyoti, please.
So some of these reserves, or you asked, is this based on this year's underactivity or next year? Some of these are based on historical underactivity over many years, so there's no reason to expect that they would pick up next year. In terms of plans for the reserves, my officers are actively working up proposals at the moment, and the steer I've given them is to focus on priorities that are emerging post-COVID: obesity, children's mental health, adults' mental health, and recouping some of the underactivity in primary care in terms of identifying clinical risk factors. So they're actively being worked up now and will be brought back to committee for further consideration.
Thank you very much for that. So just so you've noticed, we've got one more to go. I'm sorry, I'm not going to bring you back because I'm watching time and I know you have to leave as well and I want to get as much as possible done. Just to give you notice, I'm going to take the questions and comments on integrated health and social care priority, and then I'll take the comfort break of 10 minutes. Questions on integrated care and health. Councillor van der Ven.
Yeah, I think we need to pay tribute to our colleagues, both within the council and the NHS, for the tremendous work last week on the integrated care system workshop that many of us attended. It had to go virtual at the very last minute, and attendance was still just almost 100%. But there was a consensus on the fact that we must integrate health and social care. We cannot look after people properly otherwise. Equally, we cannot understand public health and health inequalities unless we integrate the ways in which we look after people, but also prevent health inequalities in the first place. And that understanding of health inequalities maybe is best expressed by saying that, you know, if you want to prevent health inequalities, you look first to housing and employment and someone's basic life chances from the very start. And to have our acute health providers who are busy with, you know, really important immediate waiting lists on healthcare, to be fully engaged in that conversation and discussion and debate was really very powerful. And so I think we're very well set up to embark together on this, you know, this new structure, which in governance terms is quite daunting, but the mission is clear. And just maybe to add that, having looked quite intensively at that overarching structure of what the ICS and the ICB and the ICP and all these acronyms, what they actually are going to oversee, and then to look at caring together from the ground up and to understand the asset mapping that I was mentioning a few minutes ago and how that leads up to the integrated neighborhood. And then, you know, you can see the top and the bottom actually working together. And that conversation simply could not happen if we separate out social care, health, public health, all the different things. People need to be cared for in a holistic way. So I did want to thank especially Jyoti and Wendy for the very intense amount of work leading up to this. And I know you were moving house at the same time, so thank you.
Good last point, but a very serious first point, and I took part and I thought it was fantastic, and I know that it's been very influential, so thank you. Councillor Bowden.
Thank you, Chair. As your Vice Chair will be very well aware from our years on the Health Committee, I've long argued for a rebalancing of the total health and care structure away proportionately from acute services towards primary care, social care and prevention. And any sensible person looking at the system as a whole could only come to the conclusion that that's an appropriate direction to go in, which is why I so much favour the direction of travel that is currently being taken. However, I was actually laughed when I read the phrase in here that there's an assumption that there are no budgetary impacts at this time and this will be progressed within current resource. If this is going to work, there are going to be massive budgetary impacts, and we will be tossed around like a ship in a stormy sea, depending upon the way in which primarily government sets all of this up. And I think it is naive to assume that there will be no budgetary impact as far as we're concerned.
It's a fair question. In a moment, I'll ask the officers to respond, but other questions first. Councillor Wilson.
I apologise, I'm only just sort of catching up with the numbers. Where in the tables does it talk about the public health reserve being 4.5 million? One question. Well, that's what I thought. And it also refers to the public health grant has not yet been announced. So I just wonder whether officers got any news about when it might be announced and what value it might be. Because the assumption is that it's about £26.5 million. If it's significantly different, that might completely wipe out our reserve and mean we can't do as much as we might want.
I will bring Jody back on that in the end. On the first point, I think it's been covered, and we'll pick that up in the December papers. I don't think we need to redebate that, and it's a very fair question. But can I just bring us back to the ICS and anyone else who wants to comment? I'm going to make a short comment myself. The reason that as an administration we've put nil, but I will get the officers to answer as well. Is because this isn't about us putting more money in 2022, 2023 at the moment. It fully appreciates the fact that the government's announcements on social care and what happens in the ICS will have dramatic implications. I just on behalf of the administration want to acknowledge that. But our plan is not ourselves to put more of our existing money into the pot in 2022-23, but to negotiate well and set up the arrangements well for the ICS, so that, and I'm really glad there's cross-party support for this, money is moved out of acute and into prevention, and that's why there's a nil there from the point of view of the administration, not because we don't realise it. In fact, we could have left this off altogether, because we're not proposing putting more money in, but we feel so strongly that this is crucial and important to the people of Cambridgeshire, even though there's no money we're planning to put in extra. We want it to be seen as the priorities, and we want to signal that how important our negotiations with our health partners is going to be, and how important the ICS is going to be in this. So it's a welcome question, but one that I welcome also what appears to be cross-party support. Will? No, can I take Charlotte first, and then Will if he wants to add anything. Charlotte.
Yeah, certainly. So this is about a whole system change, which is why it wouldn't be appropriate for us just to be sort of saying we're going to put some money aside to do this. This is our day job as far as we're concerned. So there are significant implications. I mean, that the amount of resource in total available within health and social care is huge. So the challenge is, how do we, working alongside NHS partners, actually achieve what's set out here, which is a shift towards early help and a more preventative approach. And it impacts on so many things that we do. The local authority's got a lot of expertise to bring to the table. So we've had a successful early intervention sort of demand management programme where we've learnt a lot about how do you evidence impact. So we're very much bringing that into the conversations with our colleagues in the ICS. I mean, the only other thing I would want to add is that I think as Councillor Van der Ven said, actually, the things we've been discussing today, like caring together, direct payments, more work on carers, all of that is part of this shift. So the trick is in joining all of this up, as Councillor Van der Ven said. And I think the acid test for me will be when I spend as much time talking about promoting good outcomes for people in the community and preventing escalation of need as I do on discharge planning, which at the moment is inevitably what we spend. So, you know, the pressure on hospitals and primary care at the moment is huge, and we spend a lot of time talking about how can we support them with that pressure, which is absolutely right. But we do need to shift the debate, and I think the system is very open to that, but we have to bring kind of expertise to the table and practical help, I think.
And Justine, please.
In terms of the public health grant, probably Christmas time, I think it will be announced. Will it go up? Will it go down? It was successively going down year after year until the pandemic came along, and then it obviously went up in 2021 and it went up again last year. But in terms of those reductions that we were seeing, they were about 690,000 a year it was going down by. So the reserves are plenty big enough to cushion if it were to go down. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see whether, you know, in the pandemic context, one hopes it won't, but we'll have to wait and see.
They're watching, you know they are. That was a joke, by the way, and it was aimed at the committee, not at Justine personally. A bit of humour does no harm in what are very, very serious deliberations that we're doing. Brilliant. So I think we've had a really good time. I think after the break, We'll probably go a bit quicker because although the items are extremely important, they're a lot of small items that cumulatively have an importance. So I think we'll probably go a bit quicker after the break. We'll have a comfort break. The time now is 38, so at 11:50, 10 to 12, please make sure you're in your seat to resume promptly. Thank you for being back promptly. So we've got 2 more sections of this report to present, but as I say, there are a lot of smaller items that add up. So I'll get Will to present 3 of 4 first, and then we'll see where people's questions and comments are in terms of then getting into the detail. Will.
Yeah, thank you. So we're now moving on to savings and increases in income. What is in your pack and what this slide is showing? On the left-hand side is a table of savings that are already in the business plan, and the box on the right is showing new savings opportunities for 22-23. I will just say that there has been some movement in some of the savings that are in the current business plan. I'll draw on 2 in particular to your attention. One is the saving on the inflationary saving on where we've acquired more beds on long-term contracts. Again, this came to committee, I think, at the last committee, I believe, and we didn't acquire as many beds as we had planned, and therefore the inflationary gain was less. And so that number has been reduced to reflect that. And then the second change is we've talked about the independent living facilities, and we've reprofiled the savings from that in line with our expectations about when they'll come live. And as a result, the savings for 22-23 have been taken out of 22-23 and rephased into later years. The only other change I'll bring to your attention in the current business planning is around the Adults Positive Challenge programme work. So this is a programme that's been running for 3 years or so now. It's been really successful, and it's as a programme is coming to an end and is becoming business as usual, and there are a small increase in savings from that work. If I can move on to the new savings opportunities, so that's on the right hand side of the slide. They amount, so we originally had £4.3 million worth of saving in the current business plan. That's reduced to 3.8 million. We have identified, though, further opportunities, and they're listed in the right-hand side, just over £5.5 million worth. And there's sort of 3 categories to those. The first is the rebaselining of the adult social care budget, and that's largely as a result of COVID loss. And that, you can see, is the £2.4 million worth there. We then have the other 2 categories are savings, and I'll give some examples of those. And the third category is where we've got increased contributions coming, so this is income, increased contributions coming through for services such as the Better Care Fund, or where we've seen an increase in money received from health for services that we jointly commission. So we've got £2.4 million worth as a result of reviewing the baseline. We've got just over £2 million worth of savings and just under £5 million of increased contribution from grants and increased contributions from health. So that's how this flows through. To give some examples of savings, you can see the extra care tendering, for example. This is where we plan to retender some contracts that provide care, where we believe we can get a better and less expensive service. Another saving, you can see the increased support for carers. So this is the other side of the investment, where we know that if we can support carers, it can help prevent carer breakdown, and therefore leading to, as a result of that breakdown, individuals needing more expensive care. And then in terms of increased contributions, they're largely coming through the Better Care Fund. So the Better Care Fund and Improved Better Care Fund are pooled budgets with health, and there are guidelines around how that money is used and spent, and that money in effect is so we've got an increase, an inflationary increase, and you can see that there of 1.5 million, and we're taking that to saving. Now, I just want to put that into context. We've talked about needing a further 10 million to cover our demography and demand costs. This uplift in the Better Care Fund is designed to help try and offset some of that demand, and that's why we're taking it to saving, if that makes sense. I think I'll stop there, if I may, and take any specific questions on the...
Right, we will have Councillor Wilson first, please.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Will. And two specific questions. On the savings, can you reassure us that none of these savings will lead to a deterioration in the service that we provide? And, for example, a change in the criteria for intervention by the county council, and/or people are going to have to pay more as part of their contribution towards the services. Because you've talked about the increased contributions coming primarily from the Better Care Fund, but does it also follow that there may well be an increase in contributions from individuals towards the cost of their existing care?
Like before the break, I'll take all of the questions and comments and then ask Will to come back and others to come back. Councillor Baird.
Thank you. Yes, I'd like to know that question, what Councillor Wilson's just said as well. Also, I've noticed on this, if this is the time to say it, we used to have a physical disability board, and it doesn't seem to be on any of the papers now, and I just wondered if somebody could tell me why, or has that completely finished? Because if it has, I'm not happy.
We'll see if it was a saved item from a previous year or not. Anybody else? Councillor Van der Ven.
Just sorry, Will, this is a repeat request. When you said health, I just want, only because as we're integrated now, thanks. You meant NHS, didn't you? Yeah, thanks.
I'm less worried about that one, I have to say, because I think, not that I ever disagree with my vice chair, but I think we've got to have a grown-up view about the importance of health, and I think it's Jyoti's role is both to deliver public health for us, but also to be a senior officer telling us what we should be thinking about the health service, about the integrated care from our point of view. And I think we straddle both, and I think we've just got to, and I think Councillor Van der Ven's point is very important. We've got to understand the different responsibilities, but I also think that we can talk about health because I think we all do understand and that we have those twin track responsibilities. But that's a view for what it's worth. Anybody else got questions or comments on the savings and increased at the end, Jyoti? Savings and increased income slide. Yes, Councillor Slatter.
Just a small thing. The prisons grant underspend, is that stuff that we couldn't do during COVID and we'll start doing it again afterwards? And because obviously it's a loss and it will have caused some problems for people. But I'm also interested to know what we do. I mean, I'm aware of prison libraries and so on, but what do we actually do in prisons?
Anyone else? I think Councillor Wilson's point is the crucial question, and on behalf of the administration, I believe that there will be no deterioration of service in any of these savings. I don't think Councillor Van der Ven and myself would have overseen these reports coming through if we believed that, but I think it's a really important question and very good to get the answer on the record, so I thank Councillor Wilson for that question. Will?
Yes, so I can confirm that these we don't expect any deterioration in services. In fact, quite the contrary. So when you look at how these savings have come about, it's actually investment in delivering services either differently or continuing to invest in prevention and early intervention. So I'll give a few examples if I may. So we've got the micro enterprises support here as a saving, and that is a direct result of supporting those. We've had the discussion about the benefits of micro enterprises. So that's one example. Another example might be around the I'm just trying to find it on my list, the increased support for carers. So in answer to your question, not only do we not expect a deterioration in care for people, but we actually expect it to improve as a result of the things that we're trying to do. As far as the prison underspend is concerned, that is money that has. I'll let Charlotte talk about what goes on in a prison, because I haven't been in one. But
that was an outrageous slur on a great professional. After the Rehabilitation of the Offenders Act, we should not be talking about Charlotte's past in this way. I can't believe, Will, that you dared to say that, and I apologise to Charlotte. We know you've turned over a fresh leaf, and we congratulate you for it. Will.
Sorry, I couldn't resist. But that has been an underspend that's sort of repeated year after year. So that is just a realignment of spend. Basically, we haven't ever spent up to the budget, and so we're removing that consistent underspend and taking it to saving. If I could hand over to Charlotte.
Three other officers to intervene. I'm going to take Justine, then Jyoti, then Charlotte, in all seriousness. And that was a joke, just for the record. I did a joke, and there is no substance whatsoever behind what I said. Justine.
So I was just going to say a couple of things, actually. One, just to note, there is a client contribution increase in those savings, but that's previous policy changes that are still coming through. So that is the only thing that you will see in these tables that relates to increased money coming from individuals. In terms, I think Will's covered the prisons grant underspend bit. I mean, actually, it's a completely unring-fenced grant. It's not given to us based on the numbers of people that we support. It's given to us on some allocation. It's for adult social care to people who are in prisons in our county borders. And actually, the grant went up by 20,000 this year, and we, as Will said, we've been underspending even before that, so it's just money that is not needed for the service we provide.
Stop giving the government good ideas, Justine. I know you're answering the questions truthfully, but we don't want them to cut our grant. Jyoti is next.
Thank you. I just wanted to come back on the question of public health versus health. Public health has a small budget and a small team, and I'm clear that the determinants of health lie predominantly outside of public health, the health service, but actually the social and wider determinants, and it's important that me and my team work across the system to maximise those benefits.
Hear, hear. And in all seriousness, what do we do in prisons, and why can we save money without jeopardising it, Charlotte?
As a result of the Care Act, we were given responsibility to also support in people who are in prison with care needs. What that means in very practical terms is that we actually provide a arraignment service into our prisons. We've been doing that for several years now and have actually had really positive feedback and been sort of recognised for the fantastic practice our arraignment staff do, which is really good. But actually we have learned that we can do that, but also managed to give up a small amount of money from that. It's not a ring-fence grant, so we are fulfilling our responsibilities in relation to prisons. If ever you want to know more about it, I could certainly, we have some quite animated discussions about it in my team.
Would be interesting, I mean, because it's one of those things that does sometimes worry people, that there is sometimes very poor healthcare in prisons, and if it is in any way a county responsibility, or there is a way in which we can reasonably help, I would want us to be doing so. So thank you.
I've done 2 prison visits, not as chair of this committee, but in my prior life, and they're absolutely fascinating. So if anybody in the committee wants to actually go into a prison and see our work, I would recommend that would be really, really interesting to do. On the client contributions, I'd like to say something, then bring Councillor Wilson back, because I think he wasn't fully satisfied by the answer. The new administration hasn't, Susan and I don't believe, have fully scrutinised our client contributions policy, and it's certainly something we should do, and I acknowledge that. We did look at it with our officers, but as has been said by Justine, we've inherited some savings in terms of client contributions, and it is important to say that, and we perhaps need in the next period to scrutinise those carefully. But what Justine importantly said is that we've got no new proposals for client contributions in terms of next year's savings other than the ones inherited from the old administration. So I want to just put all of that on the record because it's a highly sensitive point and a very important question. Did you want to come back, Councillor Wilson?
Well, if I may, first of all, how much money is assumed for the increase in client contributions in order that you can then have that debate? And it's a pity that Councillor Bowden isn't here, because he did mention Anna Bailey a couple of times this morning, and Anna was the chair of the Adults Committee, which was promoting this last time round. So you might want to just balance up her aspirations for neighbourhood cares, which we did support, as well as the increase in client contributions, which we didn't. Thank you.
Okay, I will just defend Councillor Bowden in his absence. He's obviously not here to answer that. His colleagues are. And I think the key point about Councillor Bailey is that a policy towards what was called Happy at Home was followed, but it didn't involve changing the commissioning, and what this administration will do is change the commissioning to follow those aims, and I see that as a much more fundamental and different approach. Now, on the point about the detail of the client contributions, we can't obviously do it all this morning, but it's an important question. So, Justine, I will ask you just to say a little bit more.
So I have to admit, I'm obviously relatively new to adults and health, and I don't know the history of those changes, so I'm wondering if Charlotte might be able to help on that. In terms of the numbers, they're in the tables here, so it's 562,000 for 22-23 and another 164,000 the following year.
And Charlotte, please.
Yes, so this was a very heavily debated issue by the previous committee. It was a really comprehensive consultation about the contributions policy, because we were out of sync with other local authorities. So that was the basis for the changes that were made. And we are in the process of implementing those changes that were agreed previously.
I think what I hear from all that is that we need to scrutinise this in more detail, and I welcome the fact that Councillor Wilson has raised this. So we move to the... have I missed someone? I do apologise. Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chair. It's just on the public health budgets. Will that help more people because of the COVID? Because, of course, people are suffering after they've had the COVID. I'm just wondering, is that money going to help these patients?
It's a short question, but a damn big one, isn't it, Jyoti?
Do you mean specifically long COVID, or more the health service have paid for a particular long COVID service that they funded, so that the health service have paid for that? Okay.
Great, that was a clearer question and answer than I feared, so thank you to both of you. Okay, so we move now to the fourth set of slides, please, Will.
Yeah, thank you. So if we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. I will just say, actually, on the client contribution policy changes, of course, the social care reform will change that very considerably, and I think it's worth just pointing that out in terms of the changes about how things get paid for. And we're currently working through that, as we've said. So if we move on to pressures and investment, so as demand for our services grow, so does the need to make sure that we've got enough capacity ourselves to meet that increased demand, and not just meeting the demand, but meeting our sort of statutory requirements and also our contractual requirements. And this table summarises those here. And we've talked about the demand and demography, so I'll skip over that if I may. We've talked about the pressure on care costs and the living wage. I'll just bring to your attention a couple of things. One is we touched earlier on the care home support team, and this is which we're asking for investment, not in 22-23, but actually in 23-24, and reoccurring investment. This is a team that came together during the height of the pandemic. It's a team of dedicated social workers and tasked to support care homes, and particularly in terms of quality and practice. They have been very successful in doing that. In fact, one of the key objectives of that team is to prevent or reduce the risk, at least, of provider failure, because obviously provider failure has a very big impact on the residents that are being cared for, and also can be very costly. So that I think is important to bring to your attention, that we're making a request to continue that investment in that resource, to continue to focus on those things. And then in terms of the quality and practice team, and I'm sure Charlotte can talk a bit more about this, our services will be subject to external inspection by CQC from April onwards, and we need capacity within our teams to make sure that we meet those requirements. And then the last one is around the expansion of the enhanced response service, and we've talked about the enhanced response service at previous committees. It's a fantastic service that again delivers some amazing benefits. So this is where we respond to on a 24/7 basis calls to support people in the community if they fall over or what have you, and it's an early intervention. Basically we're trying to prevent people having to call an ambulance or go to the hospital by getting to them really quickly, really early, and helping to support them. I'm not sure if Charlotte, you want to add anything to that? No.
Okay, on the national social care changes, we did have a discussion about that a month ago, a first look at it, and we don't know lots of the implications. So it's important we note that, but I'm suggesting we don't debate that today. We will have other times, I promise you, where we will properly debate that, but today isn't the day to do that because we don't have the information to say too much more than we said a month ago. So on the table that you see there and on the presentation you've heard from Will, any contributions from members? Councillor Van de Ven.
Thanks. On the care home support team, sorry if you've explained it, was this funded through government on an emergency measure during COVID? No.
Wait.
Oh, sorry.
No, not sorry to you. You continue. We'll wait.
No, obviously. That was my question, actually. And through a visit to the team, a brief visit, it was obvious what an impact and how important that team is. So, I think it's really important that support continue. And I just wanted to clarify where the original funding came from.
Any other questions or comments from members? I think my comment for us, Will, to come back, and this is particularly aimed at Susan and my colleagues on the joint administration side, a lot of these don't look very important to us as politicians. But if we've got an increase in pressure, in demand, then we have to have people to manage it. And our managers have come up with, a series of relatively small, but they believe to be very important changes for that we can manage the service well. And so I don't think any of us are going to be sort of browbeating behind any of those proposals. But the failure to do them would lead to things going wrong and the quality being impaired. And so even though politically that's not quite as sexy as far as we're concerned, there was a deliberate irony in that phrase, I would just appeal to the joint administration members as we defend these in the budget process to recognise their importance You know, Susan and I have gone through this list in detail with the officers, and we are convinced, and the example of the care home support team is a very, very good example. It stops things going wrong and gets them going right more of the time in a way that I think reflects well on this authority. And for us to let that go, I think others might say, oh, well, you could save money on that, but it would be a counterproductive saving, really would be, if we chose to do it. So that's more aimed at our own colleagues on our side, when I'm sure we're going to be scrutinised and questioned over some of these things. Will?
I'll hand over to Justin to talk about how the service was funded.
So the care homes investment went through the business plan last year. As we've talked about investments this morning, about things that you might put money into. That's what the care homes team, that's how it was funded last year. So 240,000 was put in for a 2-year pilot. And so at the moment, the business plan assumption is that money comes out again over 2 years. It was slightly delayed anyway, but it was put in as a response to COVID, but you know, as has been said, it's working really well, and it's been seen as a way to sort of to prevent care home sort of breakdowns and things in the future. So it's just a standard part of the business planning thing, goes in, comes out. But what we're basically saying on this is there's no impact for 22-23. We've got the funding to keep it going for 2022-23, but come 23-24, in order for it to continue, we need to put it back in as an investment. Can I just pick up on national living wage on here as well? So this national living wage calculation is based on a national living wage of £9.24, which was the OBR's forecast at the time we did the calculations. Lots of talk about that going up to £9.42, so that number probably needs to increase in the next iteration.
All the numbers need to be reviewed and will change by December. We know that, and that's just one of them. Councillor Van de Ven.
Yeah, thanks. In terms of the Learning Disability Outreach Service, I just am minded of our previous meeting and the review of the autism strategy, and how very ambitious it is, and how great a breadth of knowledge is required to get to grips with this. And there is a member development session actually on the Learning Disability Partnership, which I've signed up for and asked the details to be shared. It will be virtual, but you know, it's a big challenge, and I'm looking forward to that, and would hope others might be able to join me then. Thanks.
Just say I did a personal visit to one of our Learning Disability Partnership projects in March in Fenland yesterday, and it was really interesting. And I have to say, it helped me understand the LDP even better and be impressed by it, to be honest. And I met people with learning disabilities who we're supporting, who are doing brilliantly. And so I hope that people will join that development session that Councillor Van de Ven talked about. But also I encourage all members of this committee, cross-party, to ask for visits if you're in areas that you're interested in, to go and see for yourselves, and be able to come back here and talk about it, as I've been able to in relation to that. Charlotte. Sorry, I thought you did it again.
Yeah. Sorry, just to add to that, so I think we've put together a really interesting member training programme for you, and it would be really good if you could look at those and sign up to the ones where you think you'd like to know a bit more. We're trying to make them really interesting, interactive, and make sure that you meet frontline staff and hear about direct work with the people that we support. So yeah, just encourage you to have a look. I'm pretty sure it's in the papers for today.
And Tamar's going to tell you and me off, because that's the next item, not this item, but the sentiment is a really, really good one. So sorry, Tamar. Right, now we have to do something else, but my Wi-Fi has been completely appalling this morning, again. I believe we've come to the end of report 4. No, well, to just sum up, maybe?
Yeah, thank you. So we said that we'd just very briefly touch on timelines and what happens next. So the next step is for us to take the comments and the feedback that we've had from this session, and work those up into full business cases that will come back to this committee for consideration in December. And then from there, the Strategy and Resources Committee will review the whole draft business plan and the recommendations for full council in January, with full council considering the full final draft business plan in February. So it's just an indication of a very high level of what's happening when and what work's going on in between. So the next time we'll talk about business planning is when we come back in December with with a final draft and incorporating the feedback that we've had today. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and I don't think that needs any more member comment, but I think it was important to put on record the timeline so that every member is fully aware of how this all fits together. I would like to thank all of our officers, because actually this isn't just about preparing a report and a set of slides. It's been a very exhausting and exhaustive process in which they have been engaged and continue to be engaged to try and meet our budget priorities, and they're doing an outstanding job in mine and Susan's view, and I hope that that is reflected from all of you in what you've seen and heard today. And I think when Will and I say that all the comments have been heard and noted, that is absolutely sincerely meant, and we will be meeting Susan, myself and the officers to go through the notes of this meeting in deep detail. And we hope other committees of the council, looking at Lorna, who's been quiet but following it carefully, will be able to follow and even improve the method that we've used this morning in this most transparent, most democratic way that we're trying to deal with the budgetary challenges of the authority. Having said that, I'm now going to read out the recommendations as I'm required to. It's recommended that we note the progress made to date, comments made during the meeting, and next steps required to develop the business plan for 22-27. Note the impact of COVID-19 on the council's financial planning, and endorse the budget and savings proposals that are within the remit of the committee as part of the consideration of the council's overall business plan. I'm seeing hands for before we vote, I think. Are they points of order or amendments? What am I looking at? I've seen two identically. I'll take Councillor Howell first, then Councillor Ambrose-Smith. Councillor Howell.
Chairman, I ask with your indulgence if we can split the vote into three separate sections. Thank you very much.
That's perfectly good. I will take Councillor Ambrose-Smith next.
Chair, thank you. I would ask that C is actually taken off the list, because it's asking us to endorse the budget and savings, and I think that's more pertinent to the December meeting as opposed to this meeting.
Can I just reflect on that for a second?
Chairman, while you're thinking about that, I'm just going to say that...
Can't reflect and listen, so could you just
I'm
give
sure
me a
you
moment?
can, and Chairman, you're multitasking.
However good I am, I'm not that good, but also the spirit of what have been said, I hear, and I want to see if we can meet it. Just give me a few moments.
All right.
Right. Sorry. Okay, the front bench is happy if we have an amendment that adds in the word. You might still vote against it, of course, that's entirely up to the opposition, but if we add to the C at this stage, so endorse the budget and savings proposals at this stage that are within the remit of the committee, and that makes quite clear it's not a final endorsement, and I will put that amendment. Are you happy to second it? Councillor Van der Ven will second it. If that's not acceptable to the opposition, just vote against it, of course, and we'll forget that. But if it is acceptable to the opposition, that might enable us to all vote together on these recommendations, and it is an attempt to try and unify the committee. I'll take a vote on that, but I just will give a chance for Councillor Ambrose-Smith or Councillor Howell to come back on what I've said.
If I may, Chair, no, it's not enough. For me personally, I think it should come out altogether. Thank you.
Okay,
But
thank
thanks for
you.
your consideration.
No, thank you. That's clear, and you're right, of course. Councillor Howell.
Thank you, Chairman, but I will be voting against the amendment, but thank you all the same.
Okay, well, we've had a grown-up and respectful exchange on that, so thank you. So we'll withdraw the amendment, I think. Okay, Councillor van der Ven, yes, we'll withdraw that amendment. There are no amendments to these recommendations, but I will take them separately, as has been asked for us by the opposition. So I suspect it's C where there'll be a split vote, so I'm going to take notes on A and B. If I see someone demurring, though, I will take a full vote. Recommendation A, note the progress made to date, comments made during the meeting, and next steps required to develop the business plan for 22 to 27. Is everyone happy with that? Yeah, I'm seeing that unanimously agreed. B is to note the impact of COVID-19 on the Council's financial planning. Is that agreed? Yes, I'm seeing nods all around. That's agreed unanimously. I'll take a vote on C, which is to endorse the budget and savings proposals that are within the remit of the committee as part of the consideration of the Council's overall business plan. Those in favour, please show. 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 in favour. Those against, please show. 1. And those abstaining, please show. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4. And that's 4 abstaining, so that is passed. But thank you everyone for taking part in that vote, whatever your view is. So we've dealt with agenda item 4. I think we did do it justice. Well done, everyone. We now move to, I think we can do this very, very quickly. Item 5, Adults and Health Committee Agenda Plan. It's pages 33 to 34. Are there any changes to, I'll take Tamar first if I may. Are there any changes to the published agenda plan that you wish to inform us about?
There are 2 additions to the agenda plan. There is a paper on adult social care transport tendering, and there's also an award of block car provision report coming to the December committee. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor van der Ven wanted to come in on this.
Thanks. I think we do need to fit in a consideration of the ICS, a presentation on the ICS in conjunction with the current, moves, and I think Jan Thomas at the CCG would be happy to help with that. I realise this is a very big agenda, but we need to keep up our scrutiny section here, and we haven't paid close enough attention to that. The other scrutiny item that was mentioned today was the workforce issue. At CPFT with the OTs, I really think it's important that we must keep up our good work on scrutiny, and those would be 2 of the ways I would suggest. Thanks.
Just to inform the whole committee, so Susan and I have already asked Jan Thomas whether we can scrutinise the entire arrangements for the new ICS board before it's set up, and we've asked our officers to pursue that, so it would be good to get that on the record in our minutes as well. It's also fair to say there's been a lot of consultation about it in which Councillor van der Ven and myself have been involved, so there's no lack of liaison about that, and our officers, of course, intrinsically. But as Councillor van der Ven, in my view, rightly says, in terms of our scrutiny function, there should be an opportunity for the authority to scrutinise the new planned arrangements well in advance of them actually starting in April next year. And so we'd like to put in the minutes. Do we have to vote on either of those things, Tamar, or can we just say them? We can just say them. We would like to put in the minutes. Hang on, I'll bring you in, don't worry, but I need to finish what I'm saying first. We need to put in the minutes that we would like that to happen before April, so that's recorded, and also the point raised by Councillor van der Ven about the scrutiny of the OT service from our health partners. And someone over here was talking to me, which was Councillor Dupree.
Sorry, Chair, I was trying to attract your attention and failing. Yes, two questions, neither of which actually will affect me personally, because this is my last meeting of this committee, because I'm being swapped off and replaced. So the substitute coming on will be Councillor Edna Murphy as a full member of this committee, and this is my last meeting as a full member, although I remain a substitute, so I may be back. The first question is on scrutiny, and whether... I can't remember when this committee is going to be scrutinising again general practice, because there is quite a high level of negative publicity happening out there in the community about access to GP services. And it would be really useful to hear from the GPs what the situation actually is, and what the pressures on them are, and what needs to be done to resolve any issues that people have. I know we've received a briefing about the large number of face-to-face appointments, not necessarily with GPs, I think, but with professionals in GP practices that have taken place recently, and I think a discussion about that would be really good sooner rather than later. My other question was whether you were planning to use the reserve date of the 13th of January for a further business planning meeting, because if you don't, you have a business planning update in early December, December the 9th, and then nothing until after the budget, and I wondered whether by January there might be some fuller information that might need to be reported to this committee. I don't know. I'm in your hands. Oh, and just to note that my committee will not be meeting in October, but we will be meeting in November. We've had to move our date.
Okay, there are three really important points there. One is, I heard you try to get in, but I was desperately trying not to lose my train of thought. So you didn't fail to get my attention. I was just trying to finish my sentence. And I have to say, though Edna is going to be a brilliant member of the committee, we'll be sad to see you, and hope that you do come back, because you've made a really important contribution to our work. So I will just say that. On the second point about GPs, I'll bring Jyoti in a second. On the third point about the timing of meetings, the committee members will remember that we planned today to be a development day, not a full meeting of the committee, but the authority as a whole took a decision to have a cycle of full committee meetings, to have these deliberations fully in public, and therefore obviously we've gone along with that decision, and that's why we've done that. So let's see what the authority as a whole decides to do about January, rather than preempt that with any decision of ourselves, because I suspect what we need is a consistent approach across all the committees, rather than different committees doing different things. But we've got till December to worry about that. Please, everyone, keep the reserve date free in your diaries. On the GP's point, Jyoti.
I think the question was, can we bring it to scrutiny? I'll ask Kate to add it to the forward plan in that case.
Yeah, we'll need to, there will need to be a December item for scrutiny, and that I'm sure Kate will be able to identify. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I would imagine that Kate will need to determine availability and hopefully get something on for December.
Yeah, okay, Councillor Van der Veen has spoken for me there as well. I think that is an area that could be a priority. I am the view, I've said this to the officers before, I think some people like having quicker remote appointments, as well as some people really feeling they're missing out by not having face-to-face appointments. Yeah, I think there's both there, and the national publicity you hear and see about it is only about the second, not the first. But for us to do a scrutiny position and to look at that as a matter of priority, we'll add that again if Tamar's happy to the minutes. Is that okay? And I have to say, when we get the ICS, if we can get them on one of our dates, we'll probably clear the deck and just have a session on that, because it's so crucial for the future. So that I just will note that as well. That was a long discussion about the training plan. Can also, about the agenda plan. With that is, there was one more point. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Richard. Last time we talked about COVID vaccination and lessons learned, I just wonder whether we should pencil in maybe for March a further discussion about COVID, because we've all been receiving emails regularly from John Lewis explaining the issues that we are still finding in schools. It's clearly not gone away. There are further implications on the council's services, and I think we should keep up to date with what's happening.
That's a big question. There are lots of different COVID-related items that we might have, including the recovery plan, including the continuing problems with dealing with long COVID, and including what's happening about vaccination, including what will happen if the government agrees to have compulsory vaccination of all adult health and social care staff, which they're consulting on. So those are all areas that and probably others that we would need to consider at different points. But I think the point about Councillor Wilson is we keep COVID as an issue, as a very strong priority issue on our agenda, and then we'll think about what are the pertinent and timely areas that we need to address within the agenda of specific meetings. Are you happy with that, Councillor Wilson?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Daunton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I think, I don't know if it's possible to come back on some of the items that we've had, some of the reports that we've had, because as we were talking this morning, one of the things that's really come home to me is care for people in their homes, and particularly care for the elderly in their homes, and technology, and the technology training for older people. So it's not just implements, it's actually being able to access Zoom and being able to access new phones, and that would help in so many ways. And in a way, COVID has made that even more, has come to the fore even more, that, you know, that people have needed, older people who've needed help to deal with new technology, and where do we bring that in? How do we enable that? You know, where does that sit within our priorities, and where could we examine it?
Yeah, thank you very much. These suggestions are all great. I would encourage committee members to make requests to the officers and to the Vice Chair and myself. We want this committee to be reflecting the priorities of the committee members, so I welcome that. We obviously had the tech enabled care report last time, and just to ask for your understanding as members, when Councillor Van der Ven and myself sit down with the officers, we're sort of weighing up what's the priority for different meetings, and to have new items that we think or people have suggested are pertinent vis-a-vis follow-up to items we've already dealt with. So none of these suggestions are unimportant. They're all heard, they're all noted down, and then we do discuss them each time on where we think the priorities are, and that would be a great example that Councillor Daunton just raised. Councillor Bird.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted it noted about the Physical Disability Board, Partnership Board. Can we make sure we find out a bit about that, please?
Well, let's get the answer straight away on that. Charlotte?
Yes, I will. I think we fairly recently did a report on the different partnership boards and how they operate and how the different issues are covered off, so certainly I'll share that, yes.
I think that's, I believe that it is still working. That's why I heard in that answer. But so maybe Charlotte could share some more information about that with Councillor Bird outside the meeting. That took a long time compared with what I thought, but all those suggestions were great, and thank you for the feedback and the suggestions. Is the agenda plan agreed? Yeah. Anyone against? No, that is agreed unanimously. And then on the training plan, pages 35 to 46, and we all heed what was said by Councillor Van der Ven and by Charlotte about us all really looking at that and seeing what we want to take part in. So don't just overlook it. We're all busy, but a lot of work goes into trying to give us information and access to more detailed information, and officers at a different level in those training opportunities. Having said that, are you all happy to note the training plan? Thank you very much. And item 6 is the date of next meeting, which is Thursday the 9th of December 2021, mince pies afterwards. It concludes what I think has been a really interesting meeting. I hope you've enjoyed and been informed by it, as have the public who've been watching us. I do thank everyone for taking part, and I thank again our officers for doing such a brilliant job on all our behalf. Having said that, the meeting is closed.